Several years ago, when I was first introduced to the 6-4 Fellowship, I began to realize that what I understood about prayer was not being lived out in my leadership as a pastor. You know, Jesus, when talking about our mission, he taught us to pray. And at the core of that prayer was, thy will be done and thy kingdom come. So prayer is the avenue through which we pray in God's kingdom. Paul, the greatest missionary ever to live in my eyes, my namesake, you know, he regularly challenged the church to pray for him. In Colossians, he said, pray that there will be an open door. In Ephesians, he says, pray for my words that I might communicate the gospel. And so, again, at the heart of the fulfillment of why we exist, our mission is this biblical mandate to pray. And yet, in most churches, and in most of my ministry in the church, prayer had become a thing we do, sometimes a transition, sometimes perfunctory, but not a regular rhythm of who we are. There's different from being a church that prays and becoming a praying church. And so we began to recognize that we had to demonstrate in our schedule, in our energy that we put into something, that prayer mattered. And so we began to say, if we want prayer to matter, we have to put the energy into that we're putting into what we say really matters. And so we started something that we call House of Prayer, very original from Jesus. And so we set a devoted time where we bring in our full band. We call all the church together. And we have really about an hour and a half of an intense season of prayer where we go before the Father in adoration. We spend time in confession. Most weeks we celebrate communion together. And then we begin to make our petitions known to the Lord. And so the church has seen that matters to us, that prayer is something that we prioritize in our life. I think what has to drive you in prayer is that mandate from Jesus and that calling to pray that we see repeatedly in the New Testament. I can't speak for other pastors, but for me that's antithetical to the way I think. Because the way I think is I'm driven by numbers. I'm driven by what everybody else views as success. I'm driven by results. And I don't think that's what can drive you when it comes to prayer. Because some of the greatest prayer warriors throughout history, we read of their stories of years of prayer. Perhaps a great missionary, William Carey, without seeing converts. And so we pray because we know that's what we're called and commanded to do, and we pray out of obedience. But we don't have to do that alone. And so for me, in my life, one of the things that has most impacted that enduring ability to pray is praying with others. So in my individual context, we're blessed to have other staff, and so we gather together as staff and pray together. Those are, without question, the sweetest times we have as a team. But then we have groups of pastors. I'm in a couple of different groups of pastors in my local area that monthly, sometimes weekly, gather to pray. And that's the agenda, nothing else. We may go to lunch afterwards, but we gather to pray. So gathering together with others. And then I would say that's where the 6-4 Fellowship comes together. It gives you opportunities to recognize there are other men who understand that scriptural prescription that we must be devoted to prayer and the ministry of the Word. And the 6-4 Fellowship is an avenue to help you realize you're not alone in seeking to fulfill that scriptural command.